and welcome to the Work for Change podcast. It's ya boy, Jean, spelled like Jean. I am the host this week. My brother, the co-host, ya boy John with the silent H, is not able to make it this week for the intro, but he's definitely a part of this episode. He's actually out on assignment, but he sends his love. He wanted me to give you all a kiss. I don't think that's possible. I felt very uncomfortable by that request, but just know out there's a kiss waiting for you from John with a silent H. On this week's episode, we have an awesome guest. His name is Jason Ackerman. He is a CrossFit Level 4 certified coach, been part of CrossFit seminar staff for a very long time, very knowledgeable in the sport and the science behind it. He's also the CEO of Thundr Bro. He's one of the founders of Own Your Eating, which is like a macro and lifestyle tracking company, as well as he is a fellow podcaster. His podcast is called Best Hour of Their Day, and he's an author where he wrote the book, Best Hour of Their Day. Now, I've known of Jason for a while, but it was this book that kind of put me in more contact with him. I read this book in 2 sittings, and it was super enjoyable. I say enjoyable in the podcast a lot, but it was a very quick read, very easy read, but very simple read, but not about simple subjects. He gets deep into some subjects that are really important to coaching, but as we know, how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's how this book is kind of translates, is that it's principles for coaching like a CrossFit gym or owning a CrossFit gym. But these principles apply to so many areas of your life. For example, in this podcast, he talks about how wrestling helped him find his why. And I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to give any spoilers, but how one thing, this fitness and wrestling, help him find this thing for another part of life. Another thing that we talk about in the podcast is how crazy diligence will get you to your results. So you may not get it right away, but if you keep at it long enough, hard enough, you will get it. And then the last thing I really enjoyed around the beginning of the podcast, we talk about he's talking about doing back squats, and he says, well, this is me. This is what I do now. Even if you don't enjoy it, you're doing it. And I found that is so powerful in so many areas of life, whether it's this is me, I do this now, or this is not me, I don't do this anymore. If you have that conversation with yourself, it helps kind of put you out of yourself and realizing, no, this isn't who I want to be, or no, this is the person who I do want to be. And it kind of allows you to make some decisions that maybe you wouldn't have made if you put yourself completely surrounded in that situation. That was the only thing you saw. It gives you some perspective. Needless to say, that is just a couple of the nuggets in this episode. I really hope you enjoy it. Episode 66 of the Work for Change podcast with Jason Ackerman. Let's get it. Let's get started. Jason Ackerman, first of all, thank you so much for being on our podcast. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I love talking about all things fitness, health, CrossFit, whatever we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for.
Well, yeah. That's awkward because we're not talking about any of that stuff.
Yeah. We actually just wanted to talk about your thoughts on Disneyland.
Stay away from Space Mountain.
It's a weird podcast. Yeah. It's a weird podcast.
Okay, so I actually finished your book, Best Hour of Their Day. Really enjoyed it.
Really? I don't want to hijack your podcast.
No, go ahead.
But I've not really spoken to someone that has gotten it and read the whole thing. I mean, I see some posts on Instagram and social media. Hey, I read your book. It was this and that. But then when I ask for legitimate feedback, no one wants to tell you, hey, chapter 17 sucked or whatever was going on. So what did you think?
I really enjoyed it.
Chapter 17 is actually my favorite chapter.
Yeah. I like that. I can actually tell you that chapter 17, or at least tip 17, is wanting versus deciding, because I have them all written down.
He has a notebook here with a lot of stuff.
All right.
But I do enjoy it because I liked that you broke it into, it's, what is it, 31 chapters maybe with a prologue? Like, it's very
short and
it's short and sweet, and it just, each lesson is here's a lesson, here's a lesson, here's a lesson. And so I really enjoyed that because it was super enjoyable to get through, easy to read. I read it in 2 sessions. So I really enjoyed it. Like I'm very grateful for the book. Part of it is, I think by the time this podcast comes out, I will have already just taken my level 1. And so the way I do anything is when I get interested or when I finally decide to go in, I'm just like, okay, well, time to put all my chips in that, so it's like, how can I learn how to be the best coach? How can I learn how the best movements? How can I learn how to, whatever. And so reading your book was like a necessity and very important to me because of the amount of experience that you have. So I just want to say I appreciate you putting all that knowledge into a book for someone like me to be able to consume in 2 sessions.
Well, I appreciate that. And you diving all in is very reminiscent of chapter 1, go all in, right? Yeah. So, but I tried to write a book in a way that I would want to read it. And like you, simple, short and effective type things where I kind of can keep my attention. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times I'll read a book and I'll kind of skip ahead to see how long this chapter is.
Yes,
and
that's what I do. Oh my gosh, I'm the worst. And then if it's like longer than I expected, I'm like, well, I'm just not going to read today then. I'm gonna set that down.
It's like, or where can I break in this chapter and not, feel lost and I have to go back a couple pages. So I tried to write it in a way that, hey, anytime you picked it up, 2 minutes is all you need. So I'm glad to hear that. And my concern also was people were going to buy this thinking it's like, hey, here's a step-by-step guide to running a box. And I tried to make it really clear, like, that's not what this is. Mm-hmm. Well, if you want to coach, like you're going to take your level 1 or you want to open a box one day, I think it will help you, but that's not exactly what this book is about.
Yeah. So I was hoping that you could I really enjoyed your prologue in the book, and you basically talk about your experience with wrestling and how that helped you find your why. Could you kind of tell that story for our listeners? Because I feel like it's really cool how persistent you had to be and how you kind of realized by putting your mind to it and being dedicated to something you can pretty much accomplish anything. Will you kind of tell that story of your high school wrestling and then your why and how those tie in together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for anyone that has been a part of a wrestling team or wrestled in, be it high school, college or beyond, realizes it's such a hard sport and it's really one where you learn a lot about yourself. So when I was a freshman in high school, I was probably maybe 5 feet tall at the time. And I very specifically remember telling my pediatrician, a kid's doctor was like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, oh, a baseball player. He's like, you might want to rethink that. And I was like, all right. And then I, walk into my first day of high school, freshman year, and my earth science teacher, Mr. Ortega, was like, hey, I need you to sign up for the wrestling team. And I was like, what's that? And he, briefly explained it. Sounded really fun. And I told my mom about it, and she was like, absolutely not. I can't have my, only child going to practice and getting beat up. And a little bit of convincing was all it took. And I was able to go in the next day and tell him my mom said it was okay. And, a few months later, the first practice began. And just for that entire first season, my freshman year, was like, I would show up at 2:30, and from 2:30 to 5:30, it was just the 3 hours of my day where I would get my ass kicked every single day. And, I think wrestling is the greatest sport that you can get a child involved in. I really believe that. But there's also like these downsides of, at 13, 14, 15 years old, you're putting these high school boys and some girls now in front of one another to basically fight.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're going to fight, every afternoon. It's going to be somewhat organized. Like, you're probably going to bleed once in a while, but it's fighting nonetheless, right? Mm-hmm. It's not in a cage. It's just on a mat instead. But, through the lessons of wrestling and really that idea of, hey, you got to get through the tough times, and whether it's when you're being pinned or whether it's just being beaten up for 3 hours every day. And, you have to get through those times. And looking back on it, because I've been asked this a lot, I never remember having a moment where I was like, I'm done. I'm quitting this thing. It was just like, this is what I do now. I get my butt kicked every day. This is me. This is my life, right?
Uh-huh.
But little did I realize, like, that stubbornness, as my wife yesterday literally said to me, "You are the most stubborn person I know." Remember that? She's over here listening to me talk. But, and I think a lot of that stubbornness can be, synonymous with just drive. And I think that's where I got that. So it started that year, and it just continued, and I never let go of it. And like you said, it really helped me form my why, which has shifted over the years. But what it really ultimately became was this idea of I want to help others accomplish what I have and be their best version of themselves. And for the most part, it's been through health and fitness. And it's something I'm still very excited and passionate about all these years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember in that prologue, you talk about like needing to make weight, and it was like 20 pounds less than you currently weighed or something like crazy, right? And it was like by dedicating, by committing, by putting yourself through it, and you weren't even sure you were going to make it until like the day of, you step on that scale, and it's like, wow, I made it. I did it. And it was kind of like that like revelation of like whatever you put your mind to, whatever you put your heart towards, like just chip away at it every day. And eventually you'll get to a point where you go, wow, I actually did it. Like I made it through. And so I thought it was really cool. Thought a lot of people could like resonate with that. A lot of the people who listen to our podcast, we're all on a health journey. We're all like, we never like look at ourselves and go, oh, good, I made it. I'm healthy and perfect, and I do everything exactly how I wish I could do it. We're always on a journey. We're always trying to improve. And so it's so encouraging just to hear those stories of just chipping away at it. And you make a goal.
Well, yeah, with the thing with having a why, I think that's like really, really important. It's something that a lot of people can't really grasp at the start. Like, so with me, a lot of the people that follow me are people that are trying to lose a lot of weight, because I myself lost a lot of weight. So they're always trying to find out like how I did it, how I started, what are your tips on how to start. And like for me, my why when I started losing weight was I don't want to die before I'm 40 years old, right? So it was a very like, if I keep going down this road, I'm going to die early, period. And so like that why is obviously, for me, it was a very strong why. So it made it easy for me to make the decisions that I needed to make and to be as committed as I needed to be, because if I didn't, it was like in my head, at least, it was like, I'm going to die soon. And like, who knows how true that is, because I'm only 27 now. I started losing weight when I was 20. So it's like, I don't know how close I was to actually dying, but like in my head, I told myself, if you don't do this, you're going to die. And your life is not going to be very fun up until that point. And so it was easy for me to make those decisions. And I'm sure for you as well, like at the start when you're getting your butt kicked all the time, it's like, well, this is just my life now. Like, exactly. Like when I was really starting to understand nutrition and understand that stuff and like spend hours watching YouTube videos on how to lose weight and how to track macros and calories and all this stuff, it was like, this is my life now. If I don't do this, I'm going to die. That's what I would tell myself over and over again. And that was like my why.
Well, and I think what you're saying is true. And for a lot of people, if you ask like 5 questions, I always try to get to their why. There's multiple ways, but you're like, hey, you're saying I want to lose weight, and it could be why. I want to be healthier. Why? Because I want to take care of kids one day. Why? Because I'm afraid I'll die. Right?
Yeah.
That's ultimately for most people what it comes down to. It's just kind of what your trigger is for, prolonging inevitable death.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is one of those things, and you said something earlier where it's like, whether it's weight loss or just your goals, you're like, this is what I do. And the other day I was in the middle of back squatting. And if you've ever done heavy sets of back squats, like 5x5, you're just like, around that second set, you're like,
why?
I have to do this for why am I doing this? And when does it end? And you're like, never. Like, I can PR right now, and I have to be back here in a week, and I have to do this again. And it's like so painful and so challenging, but you're like, there's something within you that's just like, well, this is me. I squat, and there's worse pains out there, but it always goes through my head, especially on days where I'm squatting heavy, where I'm like, when do I get to stop this?
Yeah.
And the answer is never.
So there are, I wanted to talk about like 3 lessons that I really enjoyed out of the book. and then just kind of have you expand on them just a little bit more.
So you enjoyed 3 out of 10. You enjoyed 10% of the book.
Yes, exactly. Well,
I'm sorry, 3 out of 30.
Yeah, 3 out of 30. I could have gone through. I literally had all 30 written down, and I was like, we can go through a little bit of each one. And then I thought,
we'll be here for 4 hours.
Yeah. I don't think we have the time for that. Unfortunately,
Joe Rogan status podcast.
And I want to tell you guys one thing that I'm doing right now is, so the book's on ebook and paperback on Amazon. We're putting it on Audible. Oh, nice. And the bonus is going to be similar to this. After every chapter, I'm interviewed about that lesson.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
It's going to be it's turning into like almost an hour per chapter. So it's going to be like a 30+ hour book by the time we hired someone to read the book. So you don't have to listen to me for the book, but then it's an interview after every chapter. So we're doing one a day, and that's going to take another 25 days or so because we just started. But once that's out, that'll be really cool for people like you that enjoyed 3 of the chapters. You can see the one you like.
Yeah.
That I heard that's what they did with Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins.
Yeah.
His book.
That was
so he had someone read it, and then they basically just would have like a little mini podcast after each chapter, and he could expand on some of the stuff. And so I read the book, like an actual book, and I've been wanting to check out the Audible because I heard it's like really, really cool because they did that.
That's what gave me the idea. I read the book, and then someone like you told me, hey, he did that. And then I listened to it and I was like, wow, the interviews were actually better than the book. Because you could just talk about, writing is weird. I gotta, you leave stuff out just because I didn't want to make each chapter too long. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And every time we talk about the chapter, it just brings up memories that I forgot about. So it's really cool.
So the first one, I think, just kind of sums up a lot of your experiences, and it's the simple, complex, simple. And so basically what you were talking about in your book, I'll let you expand on it more, but like you look at something and at first it looks so simple, like for example, like a ring muscle up is what you use in your book, and you look at someone do it and you go, oh, that's so simple, that's so easy. And then you learn the complexities of it, and you try to jump on the rings, and you flail around, and you realize that's not as simple. It becomes very complex in that moment. But then once you've learned it and once you master it, it's now simple again. Like it's like, and you want to explain it. You want to make the complex simple, and looking at it from both sides. I don't know. I think that a lot of the stories in your life, a lot of the lessons in your book, you kind of learned it because you did it wrong at first, which is so relatable to me and my life. And so it's almost like you approach something and it looks so simple, and then you see a lot of the complexities in it. You learn about like how you talk to people and how people's emotions work, and you learn all the complexities of it. And then when you look back on it, it's like, okay, here's the way I navigate through this. This is simple. So I really thought that it was like that theme seemed to happen a lot in the book.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, that idea, and something I refer to as simple, complex, simple, is that idea of when you look at somebody that's really good at something, they make it look easy to the point that you're like, well, I can do that. But you don't, and that's where, so we refer to it as the near side of complexity and the far side of complexity. So that near side of complexity is where you just look at it and you're like, that looks simple, I can do it. And then as soon as you start, and it can be something like a ring muscle up, or, lately I've been trying to cook more. And you could watch, like, my wife's always got, what's the dude, Kitchen Nightmares, Gordon Ramsay. Gordon Ramsay, makes it look simple. So you're like, I can do that. And then when you get started, you're like, wait, I have to dice these onions and I have to prep this food and that. And you're like, this is complex. But when you work through that, now it's easy again. And I always thought, if I'm doing a good job, it will encourage other people to try to do it because I do make it look easy, but then they have to battle through that. So for me, it was also, like you said, a lot of failure and just a lot of not being good. I'm not very athletic naturally. So anything I've achieved athletically has been through hard work. And that specific story is why I'm able to coach the muscle up better than my coach Matt at the time. Because Matt walked in and literally jumped on the rings and did a muscle up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is how you do it. And he was the same dude that day one had a sub 3-minute Fran when that was very, very hard to achieve.
Yeah.
And I was like watching him coach one day and realized, wow, he can do muscle ups, but he can't coach these at all because he has no idea how to break it down for people. And for me, it was, I really had to learn how to develop a false grip and where to pull to on the way into the transition and how to develop the strength for the pull-ups and the dips versus Coach Matt, who is just a natural at it. And for many things, especially coaching, the best coaches in the world just make it look easy. And for that reason, I think that's why some jobs also are like, oh, you're just a coach. Like that's what you do. Cause it doesn't look very hard if you just watch someone do it. I mean, take podcasting. Like you guys are literally just talking to people.
Yeah.
Like that's not that hard. But at the same time, then if someone's like, well, they have to figure out, I see you adjusting levels nonstop. So it's like, okay, we don't want this to sound like garbage. So I adjust things and we wear mics and we look at each other to make sure we don't talk over one another. And that's why a podcast like Joe Rogan's is so popular because he does all these complex things well to the point that it just looks like he's having a conversation.
Yeah.
Where there's everyone has a podcast these days, right? And it's more than just hopping on a phone call with someone.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, like, I remember when I used to watch the Olympics back in the day. And I mean, I was like a little fat kid, right? And I'm watching the Olympics and I'm watching gymnastics. I'm like, that looks freaking easy, man. Like, they're just like jumping around. But then once I actually started like doing CrossFit and like getting on the rings or like trying to learn how to do a kipping pull up, I was like, how are they doing that? Like it made no sense to me. And there's the I forget who was saying it, but they said like during the Olympics they should have one regular person do the events with them. So like the sprint, just having me like next to Usain Bolt. Like wait, because like you see everyone that's so good and it looks so easy. Like they're just running, but if you put someone next to them just like sprinting and they're just, I think that'd be great. I hope they do that sometime.
Well, and I mean the ultimate sport is curling.
Oh yeah.
Man, that's the one where everyone's like, wait, I drink beer and I throw a thing down ice. I can do that. And then you know, that was also why in that 2010, 11, 12 date range of CrossFit, every day someone would come in and be like, hey, I want to go to those CrossFit games to compete. Because the best made it look so easy that just anyone off the street was thinking, oh, I can do that and make $250,000.
Yeah, I wasn't that naive, but I did go into my first CrossFit gym ever telling them that I was hoping to be at the next regionals. And I've never been athletic one day in my life. And I was like, yeah, I would like to go to regionals. And they're like, okay. All right, well, let's get you a pull-up first. You know?
Let's deadlift your body weight and then we'll talk again.
Yeah, I get people that always comment because they see that I do CrossFit, like, oh, you should go to the CrossFit games. I'm like, yeah, I'll be there watching for sure. Like, I'm definitely never gonna be at the games though.
All right, so we're gonna interrupt this episode to give you a quick word from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is WOD Prep. If you email Ben, B-E-N, at wadprep.com and in the subject line, put the special passcode, which is Chipotle is my life, because, let's be real, I had Chipotle twice yesterday. One for lunch, one for dinner, and it was delicious. But if in the subject code you do Chipotle is my life to Ben at wadprep.com, he will give you buy one, get one free on any of his 8-week courses. And he's got so many to choose from. Double unders, kipping, toes to bar, pull-ups, ring muscle-ups. What do you want to know? He's most likely got a course for it. And here's the best part. All of his courses are 100% results guaranteed or your money back. He is that confident in his product, and the whole reason he's making the product is to help you gain a skill. So if you make this thing and you're not any closer to your skill and you feel like it was a total waste of money, he'll give you all your money back. But if you like it, you have a new skill. I forgot what I was saying right there. So again, Ben at wadprep.com. In the subject line, say Chipotle is my life, and you will get buy one, get one free on any of the 8-week courses. Super good deal for Work for Change listeners. We hope you enjoy. Now back to this episode. Another lesson I liked was your whole chapter on argue like you're right and then listen like you're wrong. I think I liked it not for the side that most people probably do. I never argue like I'm right. I just assume I'm the wrong party all the time if someone is against me. I'm like, oh, I must have had that wrong. Okay, let me, you know. And so I actually enjoyed it for the fact that, like, yeah, you know what? Instill some confidence in yourself. Like, if you're going to take a stand on something, like, argue like you're right. But when it's time to listen, don't just assume they're wrong no matter what. Like, listen like you're wrong.
Why are you guys laughing? Because
I don't know. Why is he
He's
smiling
lying. Is what I'm laughing because that's not true. You argue like you're right all the time.
Maybe against you.
Yeah, there you go.
But like against anyone else in life, I just assume
that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like if someone's like, no, that's not the way to do it. I'm like, oh, what's the right way to do it? I guess I'm wrong.
I think you tend to argue more confidently with the people you care about and the people you trust and know more. So that's certainly part of it. But
well, it doesn't help that he's always wrong.
Yeah,
it's true.
Well, you just and sometimes you just have to admit, hey, I picked the wrong partner, but I'm stuck with him.
Yeah.
So that chapter, and then the one we kind of joked about earlier, wanting versus deciding. It's you get to a point where you realize, hey, I'm here because of the decisions I've made, and you're not there because of the decisions you haven't made. So that wanting versus deciding chapter was all about one of my coaches that would constantly argue with me, and I'm like, hey, dude, just go open your own box. If you feel this way, like it's really simple. Go get your own money, go find your own space, go buy your own equipment, but you're not doing that. So in the meantime, we're going to do it my way. And this chapter here of argue like you're right was a similar situation where oftentimes I just had to put my foot down, but I realized, hey, there came a point where you have to realize other people might be right once in a while. And funny enough, we weren't doing this chapter yet for the audiobook, but we were talking about something else where this particular person, his name's Caleb, came up because he was the person I was arguing with. And I said, all these years later, I was like, he happened to be right about the argument that really was the catalyst for our, explosion in our relationship. We were arguing. I remember we were sitting in the office and arguing, and he was like, hey, Jay, I don't think we should do rebounding box jumps anymore here. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, of course we should be rebounding. We need to go fast. We need to do this. And I mean, if you look back, it's one of the most prominent injuries in CrossFit is a blown Achilles Julie Fouché did it at regionals in maybe 2012, and other people have done it. So it wasn't even years later. Shortly after, I did realize he was right about it, but we were just in such a heated battle. It was like, I don't care. I'm not looking at your perspective at all. I just feel like I'm right and you're wrong, and then ultimately that spiraled into a failed relationship. We sold the other business that we had together, or I sold it to him, I should say. But had I just stopped, taken a breath, and listened to the other side of the story, and that I think holds true. Where that's really benefited me is in my marriage. I mean, I've been married almost 3 years now, and oftentimes it's like we butt heads, and I'm like, okay, maybe she's right. Maybe, and even if you don't believe that person is right, or even if you're like, this is really wrong, but I'm at least just listen. And the other thing I've learned is most of the time, if you listen, at least you can understand where they're coming from. Like Caleb, who was my coach, arguing about box jumps, wasn't arguing about box jumps. He was just trying to keep the athlete safe. So if I would have stopped and said, okay, while box jumps yield a higher intensity if you rebound and this and that, ultimately what's more important? Do these, average Joe people coming into the box really need to put themselves at risk of tearing their Achilles? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said of being able to share, like, whatever you like, if you want to call it losses or hard lessons, because, like, honestly, I feel like more often than not, that's where you can actually help more people, is like sharing, this is what I did wrong and this is what I learned from it, instead of being like, yo, I'm awesome at all this stuff, like, just do what I did, because it's hard to relate to that, because like you said, your friend Matt that like just jump up and did the rings, like, most people are going to see that and be like, well, I can never do that, so that's not helpful for me. But when you talk about, okay, I did this, it took me years to learn how to do a ring muscle up or whatever it might be, one, it's always more relatable to more people probably. You know, there's a lot of people that are like, when I first stepped into a CrossFit box, I never thought I'd be able to do a ring muscle up. So like I can relate to that a lot more than someone that just jumps up and tries it for the first time. So like being able to share those like losses or hard lessons like helps so many more people than just, oh, I'm great and perfect and everything I do is 100% all the time.
Mm-hmm. And 90%, probably more, are 95% of the people you're going to meet at the CrossFit box are like us, where they don't walk in with a muscle up. Maybe they have an athletic background, but they, can't snatch their body weight, can't do 20 consecutive pull-ups. So they're more likely to resonate with us than Coach Matt.
Yeah.
And I've learned, and that's why I say this all the time, especially at level 1 and level 2 seminars, where I'll tell people like, you being bad is actually really good for your coaching. The worst athletes make the best coaches. And, I'm not a huge football fan, and I don't know when this will come out, but the Super Bowl is past probably by the time this came out. And whoever won, the Chiefs or the 49ers, I'm sure their coach is the worst football player on their team. So, and I have no idea. I don't, last time I watched the 49ers, Montana was thrown to Jerry Rice. So I don't know who's playing anymore, but I'm confident that the coaches are not very good.
That's good. That's a good analogy, good word. Okay, the last one that we'll talk about in this episode was I really enjoyed your whole message model. I think that not only because that applies to coaching, but it applies, you gave examples of coaching and at the house. Or in regular day life. So will you kind of dig into what the whole message model is and how it can be related to coaching in the gym and then also in whatever at home at work?
Yeah, so the whole message model was taught to me by my mentor, Sasha Mirkovich, who's still my mentor, someone I talk to almost every day. And Sasha famously told me, people love you despite you. And I didn't understand what he was saying at the time, but really back in the day, I was just such a jerk. I wasn't a jerk, I would say, but I was just very opinionated. And just like we talked about, I would only argue like I was right and never listen and be butting heads with my coaching staff, the members, or, my relationships at the time. He taught me this whole message model, which is basically, I see, I think, I feel, I want. And the cool thing about it is when you get to know it, and especially if your significant other understands it, it's a common language. So it becomes, hey, if someone's approaching me with this whole message model, they care about this. They're not just trying to start a fight. They're not just going to argue, but they put thought into it. So I'll briefly explain it, but I see is black and white. So let's use the at-home one in case, someone's at home. And it's like, hey, I see there are dishes in the sink. That it has to be black and white. This is not like, I feel like there's dishes. Like, are there or are there not? There, I see there are dishes. The more specific you can be, the better, because it's really setting the stage. I think becomes why you think those dishes are there. Hey, I think, you got tired last night, so you went to bed and left the dishes. Or I think you had to rush out this morning. Or I think you were just lazy. I mean, you shouldn't really, the less blame we can point, the better. So if I see, I think, I feel has to be your emotion. Hey, I feel when you do that you don't care about this relationship. I feel when you do that you're not putting my needs ahead of yours. And then I want every night before you go to bed for the sink to be empty. End it with something reasonable, but that you actually want that's going to impact this. And if you can do that, it's hard to argue. If my wife or a friend of mine hears me starting a statement with I see, they're like, uh-oh, we're about to get whole message model. But it's cool because it kind of diffuses the anything going on. It just kind of takes it out, makes it less personal and more just, hey, we're going to have a conversation about this, which is hard to do. Oftentimes you have to take a deep breath. I'll tell people when they're first getting started, especially if dishes are not a big deal, but if it's a really big deal, go write it down. Don't be afraid to read it to somebody, but, and the same held true at the box, whether it's, the ones we would often get is like we talked about. I remember we used to have little in-house competitions, and this girl got all fired up. Her name was Ariana. I don't think she's listening. So I hope she is, but she got all fired up, and we were doing Isabel 30 snatches, and she was bigger. She wasn't overweight, but she was a bigger, stronger girl, and she excelled there. And she came in all fired up, ready to go. I could tell she was like, I'm going to win this for my team. And then she got smoked. She like blew up, 17 reps in, which is where you would blow up in Isabel if you're not training. And she's crying, and everyone's consoling her. And I went up to her. I was like, hey, I haven't seen you here. Like, when was the last time you were here? Well, it's been 2 weeks. All right. Well, I think you think you're going to be able to train and be the best without actually putting in the hard work. I feel that's kind of silly, right? I feel like you're not really believing in the product. You're not really abiding by what we're preaching here. And I want you to show up more. And then it's kind of like, okay, now I get it. Versus like before that, I would have been like, well, hey, dummy, you don't train. What do you expect?
And
that's, it's hard not to do that. It's easy to get wrapped up in the emotion of it, but where telling, and I think a good athlete like she will respect that. And if you could do it properly, you can get her fired up so she does want to train hard again.
And it's good because it forces you, especially if you're just starting it forces you to pause and think about what are you upset about. And then you can more accurately tell that to the to the person that you feel that towards, instead of just kind of like blowing up. And then now you have to deal with the repercussions of blowing up. I've been like trying to work on like pausing just a little bit before I respond to someone. Like if I kind of feel that blood rising or whatever, that agitation, trying to like pause just a second and then say how I feel or what I think, just as like a buffer, right? But having it put into this, again, it's nice because it's a common language that you can share with someone. And it also forces you just to stop for a second, if only to think about all four of those so you can verbalize it. It's a nice like buffer from your raw, pure, unfiltered emotion sometimes, in coaching and in life.
Yeah. And like you said, I think the most important aspect of it is it just makes you slow down. And if I had to write, chapter 31, that would probably be it. Talk slower. For many reasons. One, I don't think anyone ever realizes when you're talking slowly. I think it makes you sound smarter, and I think it makes you think about the words you're going to use a lot more than when you just rattle it out. So take a deep breath and pause, especially in times when emotions are high.
Awesome. Well, I want to respect your time, let you get some breakfast.
What would have been your fourth chapter?
My fourth chapter. Let me look at this.
You didn't prepare that far. You didn't prepare.
I was just hoping to honor your time with only three. Though I will say the story. So not like a chapter, but the story. The next thing I wanted to talk about was just your story of becoming a level 1 seminar staff was like so encouraging. Again, because you had to take the hard way. And so it's kind of like, it's super awesome just to see determination and commitment, even if it takes 10 internships.
Well, yeah. And I mean, my wife's still in the shower. So
okay,
we're going to get breakfast. So I have another minute or two.
Awesome.
The moment she walks out, I have to be ready to go. If she gets hangry, her head literally does a 360, spins around.
Yeah, same here. Relatable. Yeah. We're all like that for sure.
So getting on seminar staff was very synergistic with the wrestling team, and I'm excited that you're taking your first. Can I ask you what took you so long to take your level 1?
I did not believe in myself as a coach. I didn't think I was one. I just thought like, oh, I'm a guy who really enjoys this, and I wish that I could. I like helping people, which is the impetus behind the podcast, was literally just to help people. If anything, to be a relatable voice. Like I talk about Chipotle and Taco Bell and stuff all the time because
all the main food groups, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because if you talk about Chipotle, I'm going to give your listeners the biggest Chipotle. This is going to make their money's worth right now. Listen to this episode.
Okay, we're ready.
And tell me if you've done this before. So you go to Chipotle, and here's what I do. I get a burrito, and then I say, can you please double wrap that?
Okay. Okay.
You get 2 tortillas.
Yep.
So it's twofold. One, you get like 300 additional calories if you want more food. But B, if you're eating a burrito, it rarely falls apart. So there's my tip. I mean, if you take anything from this episode, get your Chipotle burritos double wrapped.
That's funny.
Share your tip, John.
My tip is that I do. What tip are you talking about? I've got a couple.
Well, let's hear them, bro. This is important stuff, man.
My main
Simple,
one,
complex, simple, right?
yeah. My main one is that even if I want a burrito, I get a bowl, because you can stuff a bowl with more food. And then
That's
I
a
ask,
good one.
and then I ask for a tortilla on the side because it's free. And then I rip apart the tortilla and I use that as my fork.
That's a really good one. I've done that before. I can't knock it, but I find that I love the way they wrap the burrito.
Yeah.
So I don't enjoy it as much when I have to do it myself.
The other thing that Jean does every time we go to Chipotle is he is always like, oh yeah, I'll have white rice or whatever. And he's like, can I have a little more? And then with the beans, can I have a little more? And then, so what I do, it doesn't work all the time, but I just try to be overly nice to the person. And I'm like, hey, how's your day going? You know? And then I'm just staring at them when they're putting the meat in. I'm like,
Good scoop. Good scoop.
Come
Please,
on.
come on.
The meat's the most important scoop. Everything else you can ask for more of.
Yeah.
But I mean, the meat is where it's at when it comes to Chipotle. And here's another tip about owning affiliates. So I've owned 3 affiliates. Every affiliate I owned was within about a quarter-mile radius of a Chipotle.
There you go.
And it's twofold. I think if a Chipotle's opening, that area is booming, right? So there's that. But then also, the best relationship you can make is that relationship with the manager of the Chipotle, because he would just give all the staff free food all the time.
Oh my gosh,
it was the best.
Good to know.
So anyway, going back to your level 1, I'm excited that you're going. You know, not that you've asked, but I would just tell you to, hey, go there with an open mind. Just pay attention. Don't worry. The biggest thing I hear about people not going to their level 1 is like, I'm not ready as an athlete. It doesn't matter. There's always going to be someone worse than you. It's like running from zombies, right? Just be faster than one person.
Yeah.
And the truth is, as a trainer who's been to over 200 seminars, we don't care. Like, you're not going to impress me with your athleticism, because I've judged Matt Frazier for the last 5 years, and Tia. I don't care that you have a 4-minute Fran or whatever the workout is. It doesn't matter to me.
10-minute Fran.
I'm much more impressed if you scale that and crush it and wind up in a pile after. And just really what I'm more excited about is when I'm lecturing at the board, if you're the guy or girl that's like nodding and I can tell that what I'm saying is resonating with you, that's so much more important than how deep you can squat. So you're going to have a blast. But for most trainers on that staff, they'll do 2, maybe 3 internships. And what that means is you show up, first internship, you literally just shadow. You don't do anything other than watch. You're part of the team. Then with each progressive internship, you do a little more. You might teach one movement. You might teach all the movements. Well, like I talk about in the book, it took me 10. And that's probably the most. I don't know for certain, but I think it's at least tied for, if not the most, internships someone's ever done. And like wrestling, there was never a moment of, well, should I stop this? It was just like, okay, I got to go again. And I think it really just goes back to, it was my goal from the first time I took my level 1 in 2007. I thought, okay, I want to be up there like Coach Glassman, like Dave Castro, Nicole Carroll, all these amazing coaches. I want to do that. And there was nothing that can stop me. In fact, my very last internship, I don't remember if I talked about it in the book, my very last internship, how it works is the flow master gives you feedback, and ultimately they're the connection between you and the hiring process. And they'll say, I'm going to recommend that you get hired, or I'm going to recommend you stop. And ultimately Dave and Nicole decide. But this guy, Curtis Bowler, who was my flow master, Saturday night after the dinner, he said, I'm going to shoot it straight with you. I'm not going to hire you. And I went back to the hotel room that I had to pay for myself because I was interning. And the first thing I did was open the computer and look at when I can intern again. Because I was in the Northeast at the time, so it would always look like, hey, when is it in New Jersey or Boston or Pennsylvania, so I can drive and avoid the fees of flying and all that. First thing I did was crack open my computer and find the next date, and then I showed up on Sunday, crushed the deadlift group, and afterwards he said, hey, I'm going to recommend we hire you. He said that was the best you coached, and I think part of it was I just kind of, it's hard. You know someone's watching you, about to give you feedback, and knowing that he had already said no, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do my best now.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's what he saw.
Wow. And like, just to, so from there, you're now CrossFit level 4, correct?
Correct.
And then by teaching, I think in the book you talk about it was in a level 1 or level 2 where you met your wife, right? You were coaching one?
Yeah. So my wife, she showed up in Miami at a level 1.
Okay.
She's making a face at me for telling the story. But she showed up in Miami at the level 1. And, we've told this story so many times, but it wasn't like, not that it wasn't love at first sight, but it wasn't like, hey, we connected and we're going to go out. It was many months later, but that was kind of where we first met and wound up exchanging information. And I saw her she lived in Cayman at the time. So I went down to Cayman to do my own seminar, and just over a 6-month period, we got to know each other. But yeah, it was at her level 1 in Miami. So, love connections often happen there.
Yeah, and it's just, like, to think that had you not been persistent, had you not been persistent and diligent in doing all the 10 internships, that wouldn't have happened. Like, so it's cool. It's literally, if you're going to talk about Matt Fraser's saying, hard work does pay off. And in your case, you got married.
Yeah. Hashtag hard work pays off. And and I think, regardless of what you're doing in life, be it fitness, career, or chasing after, the woman or man of your dreams, hard work pays off.
Exactly. Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you guys for having me. Thanks for getting up early in San Diego.
Yeah.
and recording. It was really great. You make something that could be very simple, or very complex, look very simple. So good job for you two. And
thank you.
When do you take your level 1?
It's February 8th and 9th. So
cool. Well, I'd love to hear. Shoot me a message after. Let me know who was there. You're in San Diego, so I assume you'll get like Nunu and maybe Alex Zirkenbach and a couple other cool trainers out there. I think you'll have a really good time.
Yeah, and if you just want to do a guest appearance, wouldn't mind, just swing on down to San Diego.
I'll show up for my 11th internship.
Yeah. All right, cool, man. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
See you later, man.